The scripture lesson for today comes from Mark's Gospel from the 16th chapter, beginning in verse 1. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" And when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. And as they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there's the place they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee, and there you will see him just as he told you." So they went out, and they fled the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. So they went out, and they fled the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. There it is, the Easter message. That's what you came to hear, right? Terror and fear. I mean, amen. We'll sing a hymn and we'll all sneak home and hope it gets dark early. That can't be the end. This is not what we expect as an end to the Easter story. We want to ask Mark, where is the rest of the story? There's got to be more. There's got to be more to the story. You remember Robert Fulghum? He wrote Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. He told a story that became a book title, and the story was that the fire department was dispatched on a call. They got to the house. They found a man in bed, and the bed was on fire, and they rushed in. They saved the man. They saved the house. And then they were trying to figure out what happened. So the chief asked the man in the burning bed, "What happened?" And he said, "I don't know. It was on fire when I lay down on it." And you just got to go, whoa, 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 whoa. There's got to be some more to this story. Where is the rest of the story? The story is told of a doctor in Arkansas. He misdiagnosed a patient, declaring this woman to be dead. The family was notified. You can imagine the surprise of the nurse when she discovered that the woman was in fact not dead. She said to the doctor, "You have to call and tell the family." He called the husband. He said, "I need to talk to you about the condition of your wife." He said, "The condition of my wife, she's dead." He mumbled in embarrassment, "Well, there's been a slight improvement." You go, there's got to be more to this story. Where is the rest of the story? That is where we find ourselves. Mark tells us they went out and fled the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. But we want more. An empty tomb, an angel, news of the resurrection, terror and silence. How can he leave us there? Why does he leave us there? Remember, the women came to anoint the body of Jesus. On Friday, they had stood from a distance and watched him suffer and die. On Friday, the women had watched where they put the body, and after the Sabbath, they come to anoint him. They creep through the morning darkness, arriving at the tomb just as the sun rises over the hills. Imagine what they must have felt as they walked in those early morning hours. Their overwhelming grief, their fear of being discovered, their anger at what had happened. They had followed Jesus. They believed he was the Messiah. They had supported his ministry. They had risked their lives with him, and they loved him. And now it was over. It was over and done, and he was dead and gone. So imagine the raw determination it took for them to drive themselves to that place. They were disappointed and they were disillusioned. All that had happened had undone so much, but yet they were determined. They were determined to honor his body. To these women, Jesus' body still mattered. The remaining physicality of his life mattered, and they wanted to honor it. His flesh and blood, even as it was decaying in the grave, it still mattered to him. It was still him. His hands and feet torn as they would have been, still it was him. And to them, this body was unique, and it represented the one they loved. At this point, everyone else has washed their hands of the matter and gone home. But the women have not let go, at least not yet. They have a morbid mission. It is theirs to do, and so they go. The fact that they show up with oils and spices lets us know that they were not anticipating a resurrection. They were going to do what happens when people die. They were coming to tidy up the loose ends. They were coming to put things to rest. They were coming for closure, one last chance to honor Jesus. In our own modern parlance, we might say they had come to sign the book, to show their respects. You can tell they're a bit addled. And confused because they talked about the fact that they weren't going to be able to do what they were going to do. I mean, why do you go and buy spices? Why do you bring oils and spices if you know you can't get to the body? Why prepare if you know that you're going to fail? I think they're a little bit in shock. Their world has been turned upside down. So even as they expect to fail, they go. They don't know who's going to roll the stone away. I guess they're thinking, well, at least we can try. When they get there, though, their problem has been solved. They think the stone has already been moved. There is a body in the tomb, but instead of a dead Jesus, they find a live stranger. He tries to calm them down, but if you go expecting to find the dead and you find the living, I imagine you'd be a little more than alarmed. I know I would be. He tells them, you're seeking Jesus of Nazareth, the one who was crucified. He is not here. He has been raised. See, that's where they put him. He testifies to the evidence of the resurrection. He tells them the good news. He gives them evidence. And even more than that, he says, go. Go and tell the disciples that to meet him in Galilee. So they are given evidence of the resurrection, testimony of the resurrection, and they are commissioned to go and tell the story. And it says they left in fear, and they told no one, for terror and amazement had seized them. And we wonder, how can they be quiet? Where's the rest of the story? There's got to be more to the story. From the earliest of times, this ending of Mark's gospel has troubled people in the church. In fact, it troubled two scribes enough that they wrote more verses and tacked them on to the old ending of Mark, one about 100 years later and one 300 years later, because it was not satisfying to leave the story that they were afraid, and they went and they hid and they said nothing to anybody. We need more. Tell us more. Think about what happened. Think about what has happened. Dealing with death is always complex, isn't it? Grief. Grief is always sort of the first emotion we feel, but it's not the only one, is it? There are lots of other emotions that swirl around the coming of death. For one, there's often relief. Because with the things that lead up to death, frequently it places a heavy burden on those who stand and wait. There's the stress of caregiving. There's the financial cost. There is the stress of putting life on hold. There is the boredom of the numbing sameness of day after day. And though we are generally disinclined to publicize it, we often feel relief as well as grief when death comes. I think it was the same thing for these women. I don't think they were an exception. Their intended act was one of deep devotion. It was a personal act of loyalty. It promised closure, and not just closure of a relationship to someone significant, but they were dealing not with just the death of a friend or the death of a loved one. They were dealing with the death of God and the death of this vision of a kingdom reality that was going to change the whole world. So they had cause for uncommon grief. But I think they also felt relief. Terror and amazement seized them. Think about that moment, terror and amazement. Tromos and ekstasias. We sing that hymn. Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. You know, I have stood right outside that door over there in the sacristy. On a Saturday night, I've stood outside that door looking through that peephole as this room fills up with friends and family. I've stood outside that door with a young groom whose hands and knees trembled. Tromos. He's excited about what he's about to do. He's absolutely in love, but those critical moments, there's a little fear. There's the unknown. In the birthing room, just before it's time to push, husband and wife look at each other one more time before they are forever mama and daddy, and there is some anxiety, some trembling, some what have we done, some are we ready for this? Trembling. This is a huge moment. Not just for Mary Magdalene and Salome and Mary, the mother of James. This is a moment with implications for everybody and everything. So tremble, tremble they should. Terror and amazement seized them. The announcement of this one robed in white, he has been raised. For you English inclined folks, grammar and all of that, it's a passive verb, and that means the focus is on Jesus as the object of this unnamed subject. I think those women get it. They know who that unnamed subject is. It's none other than God. God has acted. Someone with the power to undo the power of death has acted in our world right there in that place. They are on holy ground. Terror and amazement seizes them. They offer no words. In some ways, I think that's the right thing to do. Silence is not an inadequate response. In that moment, anything that they could say would probably trivialize the moment and make it more about what they saw rather than what God has done. The women's restraint allows for a moment of holy awe. We might even say fear of God. I think they realize, though, I think part of the fear that they feel is they realize that God once again has a claim on their life. You see, in Jesus, they had encountered the unlimited love of God, and it had claimed them, and it was changing them, and it was causing them to do things they never thought they would do before, and it was causing them to be engaged in challenging ministry, even dangerous ministry. No matter how inspiring the vision had been, its costly character had become apparent. You see, when you meet the unlimited love of God, you have to share it with others, and it was changing their lives. So in some ways, when Jesus died, when he was buried, then that claim on their life was buried as well. I have to feel that there was a little bit of, well, at least we're off the hook. The costly challenge of discipleship has been buried with him. But then that morning, when they are met by this news that Jesus has been raised, it means those expectations are alive, that God still has a claim on them. It means that they are still on the hook. Terror and amazement seize them. In 1964, on a frosty Sunday morning, two white college students waited nervously on the edge of their campus in Memphis, Tennessee. They were anticipating the arrival of an African American student. On the day before, they had all participated in a nonviolent training workshop. And the plan that had been developed was for interracial groups to attend worship the next day in congregations around Memphis. And so it was that those two students waited the arrival of their African American colleague, and they were going to go and attend worship in a white congregation, unannounced and probably unwelcome. For reasons unknown, the African American student never showed up, never made it to the rendezvous point. They never knew exactly why, but what they did know was how much relief they felt that those two students could go to worship without worry about risk or confrontation. We can only imagine if just as they were leaving, word was brought to them that, oh, your colleague will meet you on the steps of the church rather than here. Imagine that turn of events that, oh, we're back. With the empty tomb comes the amazing and awesome announcement that Jesus isn't dead, but with it comes the claim on the women's lives. Terror and amazement, it seized them. When the terror and the amazement of good news seizes someone's life, we realize that we've got to act. We can't just go back to the same old, same old. You know, the women leave the tomb that morning confused and afraid. There's no evidence of joy, no balloons, no brass, no butterflies, except maybe in their stomach. At that point, the resurrection was out there. It was just information. It was out there, or maybe it was up here, but it hadn't made its way down to here. They know the story, the bare facts, but the power of it has not been turned loose in their life. And it seems to me that's the place a lot of people live. They know the story. They know the bare facts, but it's not real. It's not personal, and therefore it's not transformational. It means there's more fear than joy, more confusion, struggle to find purpose and meaning. Now we know on this side of history, we know that the women and the rest of the disciples, they did get it and they did tell it. We wouldn't be here if they hadn't talked. Those women that day had every reason to be afraid, but still we want more, don't we? We want the rest of the story. It's not satisfying Mark's hanging ending. I mean, it makes you think, if you had that news, could you just walk away and be quiet? Could you keep it a secret? And I sort of wonder if that's not Mark's point. If that's not the reason Mark writes a little different than the other gospel writers. His gospel was written to be read in churches and home meetings where the early church gathered. You could read the Gospel of Mark out loud in about 90 minutes. And if you were sitting in a home church and someone read the story and you got to the place that they left in terror and amazement and they said nothing to no one for they were afraid, you would know that eventually they talked, because otherwise you wouldn't be there. The evidence of their getting over the fear was the existence of the church. And maybe in that process of second guessing them, we get engaged. We begin to think about, well, what I would have done or what I would have said. And we are invited by Mark into the story. You see, I think Mark leaves it open-ended. He doesn't tie all the ends up and make it tidy and neat, because Mark is inviting us, inviting you and I to finish the story. I think the silence at the end of Mark is there so that people of every generation can finish the story. You and I, we get to write this chapter. So we find ourselves at a now what moment. How? How will we finish it? The story's not done yet. We know that their silence didn't last long. We know it was told, or else we wouldn't be here. The thing left for us to decide is, what are we going to do with this news? We are invited to live the rest of the story. Invited to join the voices of Easter people and share the wonders of God's love. But the question is, will we? We know that the women did. We know the early church did. They were Easter people. They got over their fears and they told the story. What about us? Will we be silent? Will we roll the stone back over the tomb opening and just try to forget all of this, maybe till next year? You know, it's a question that we're faced with just like those women. What will we do? How will we finish the story? You know, there's no better day than today for this story to move from out there information to in here transformation, to accept the invitation of God's love and to say, it's not just stuff I know, it's going to be the way I live my life. It's going to change my day-to-day life. It's really actually very easy to say, I want to be a follower of Jesus. To say to God, I know I have been down this road before, but I want to recommit to being an Easter person. I want to write the rest of the story. I'm tired of being held by fear. Or maybe I'm tired of being held by busyness. I'm tired of putting my faith life and the faith life of my family at the mercy of all the stuff going on around us. This is the story I want to build my life around. There's no better day than today to say, I'm tired. I'm tired of being bound. I'm tired of being captive. I want to write the story that God wants us to write. I want to live in joy and peace, and in that power, I want to write the story. The invitation for the church is for you and I to write the story of the resurrection, for it to take root in here, in us again, to set us free from fear and inspire us to live for others. Vineville, the invitation is for you and I to write the story of God's love all over this city. And the question that hangs out there, the unfinished ending is, will you and I do our part to write the rest of the story? May God add his blessings, that you and I and the church in all of its flavors, that we would rise to the occasion and be the Easter people that our world needs us to be. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.